What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Lost Eidolons, Veil of the Witch, which is a spin-off title for a game I reviewed at the tail end of 2022 called Lost Eidolons. And this game takes the core of that game's combat system, which was a TRPG, and blends it into a roguelite setting. Now, I'm able to bring you this footage and preview via an invitation to a closed beta that the developer Ocean Drive Studios sent my way, which I obviously accepted because I enjoyed the original game for what it was worth. But with that out of the way, let's dive into it. So, the game kicks off with a slight introduction to a story here between our seemingly mortal character who has lost all of his memories and some sort of ancient witch known as Sable. Sable tricks your character quickly into a bargain before throwing you out into the world, where you have to quickly get to grips with the combat system of Lost Eidolons. Now, the core of this is exactly the same, and honestly, if you've played most TRPGs, you'll probably know what to expect here, but it does share a lot of similarities with Fire Emblem to be specific. But before we dive into that, a little more on the story itself. So after this initial introduction, where we meet a few of the characters we'll be playing along the game with, we learn that our character and our immediate friends here seem to have been shipwrecked, a shipwreck which has been caused by a necromancer of some sort who has resurrected your ship's crew, which makes up the people you are fighting in this introductory scene. And here we drag ourselves to a nearby town to get the rest of the picture. It seems that recently the island we have found ourselves on has become subject to all manner of necromancy, with people raising the dead and sending them against the towns here, and things obviously aren't looking too great. So we're going to go on a small expedition basically to try to get an idea of what the forces we're up against look like, which sets us out on our first expedition, which forms the crux of the roguelite mode. Now eventually we're going to fail, as is the nature of these games, and we're going to unlock some permanent progression basically that's going to make subsequent expeditions easier, and the story narrative around this is simply that the character that we made that deal with, or were tricked into a deal with, chose a champion some time ago, a champion that was ultimately murdered, but not before this mysterious woman gave a lot of her power to that individual. That power has now been taken by other individuals who are using it to perform all sorts of nefarious acts upon this island, and you will keep being brought back from your untimely death in order to fix this. So that's sort of our narrative framing device, if you will, with the town that we're in forming our home base alongside the other roguelite mechanics and of course the combat that we need to go over. But first, let's talk about our home base. So some of this is what you would expect, a place you can go to look at your characters that you have recruited. We will have a full roster by the end of it, but it looks like they're all set characters. We can also go to our quarters later on to discover past story moments as well as records of our previous expeditions and the things we've accomplished. And then as you progress, we unlock a few more progression-related buildings as well, such as the Shrine, which is where we'll be spending the sacred embers we pick up along our roguelite journey to transform into permanent progression, which does things like boost our actual stats for every character alongside pumping up our percentage chances of certain things happening in terms of RNG, so things might actually go our way. Fairly standard stuff, I would say. But then there's the actual expedition portion. We're going to find ourselves moving through a variety of winding paths, with each node along our journey offering up a potential encounter, be that combat, a place to rest and train, a merchant, a timely boon, etc. So right away, we'll be able to augment our run with relics. Relics have effects that of course affect the entire party, and my understanding is there's at least about 30 of these. As we participate and hopefully conquer combat, we'll also earn a few other things, such as experience for our characters' classes. These are set to an expedition, but basically as we engage in combat, we'll earn passive stats simply from clearing those combat encounters, but also we'll level up that character. At each level up, they're given a choice of a variety of different effects that they can choose to take on, making them stronger naturally as they go with certain weapons or attacks or just, again, flat stat bonuses. And then another thing you can do is upon killing certain enemies or clearing certain encounters, you'll pick up resonance stones, as it calls them, and then at the end of those encounters, you use those resonance stones to also upgrade those characters' gear, either just flatly or by adding certain enchantments to them. So between the permanent progression of our home base and then the more temporary progression out on the individual expeditions, that's kind of what you're looking at as a general gameplay mechanic. But then we have the combat itself. If you've played the previous entry, fantastic, or if you've even played just something like Fire Emblem, you'll kind of get the gist of what they've got going on here, with a few things altered to fit the more roguelite nature of it. For starters, magic users, for instance, don't have a set amount of uses for their magic in this one. Instead, they have a cooldown associated with it, which is also the case for all of your regular physical abilities as well. We've also got a sort of tic-tac-toe armor system on characters, a sort of light, medium, or heavy, which is all strong or weak to any of the others. But they've also added a few things as well. For instance, we see these classes that people have, such as a rogue that gets given to us, or something akin to a barbarian, with the rogue being able to conceal themselves and the barbarian-esque class being able to take on certain stances and enter a rage to go toe-to-toe with certain enemies and either increase their damage or up their defense respectively. We also get a healer with several abilities, of course, aimed at keeping the other characters alive. We also get archers, more damage-oriented mages, kind of the usual run of what you would expect in terms of archetypes, but they've clearly added on to some of what was going on in Lost Eidolons, which I thought was a nice touch. And each individual battle you're in can still have its own win conditions, such as defeating all enemies or simply escaping, or trying to navigate individual mechanics such as this poison gas that was creeping up on my characters in this one, and I'd be curious to see how much variety there is to that overall. But either way, eventually you're going to fail, as is the nature of these roguelites, and on one hand, if you are in just a normal mission and you lose a character but that is not a loss condition, so to speak, then they pop back up with just a few hit points after the battle. But obviously, if you lose everyone, you fail completely, or if you trigger whatever the fail condition for an individual mission is, that'll see you end an expedition as well. Starting with difficulty. Now, this closed beta didn't really have any difficulty options, and I imagine they want to test for a baseline, but seeing as this is a roguelite, I think options to adjust exactly what's going on, like in combat or specific modifiers, I think could be fun to make the game either easier or more difficult for people, as honestly what I encountered here was a little tame. And then the other thing would just be how much variety is there to the gameplay outside of those things, such as realistically how many builds are there, how important is party composition, as you can only take 5 characters with you, so is that really going to matter much if a particular class gets insanely overpowered in one specific instance or something? What do the actual battle and win conditions change, and then how varied are the individual bosses, as there are a couple of acts to this and there are boss fights. And I think the ultimate success of this one will come down to how much fun any of those are to mess around with on an individual level. But for right now, this is a game I have my eye on. I think it was pretty fun from what I experienced with it, and we'll simply have to wait for its release date to tell much more than that, I imagine. But that is going to do it for today. So I certainly hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about this down in the comment section below, of course. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.